the past Monday, the 28th, I had my class. I had a certain lesson planned. We were doing talking about Andrew Jackson, but I really felt led to talk about the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. And so that morning I decided to throw out the lesson and to spend each class period talking to the students about what was going on. And I must say I was quite pleased with how it all played out. And so I wanted to share that with you just so you can see my approach to the topic, how I addressed it, and the conversations that me and the class had regarding this. Now, I didn't want to just share the information with them. I wanted it to be more of a discussion. And so here's how I did. Now, first going into this, I had a plan. And the plan was this, that I wanted to kind of touch upon four things with the students. I wanted them to leave with four different understandings. The first understanding is what is actually going on in the crisis right then and now. So what was going on that Monday with Ukraine and Russia. And then I wanted to give them some historical background so they had a better understanding of why or how things led up to that point. And then from there, we wanted to talk about lessons from the past, lessons from history. Once again, this is a history class I teach. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but I think, how's that saying go? History doesn't repeat itself, but the tune sure sounds familiar, something of that sort. So I wanted the students to walk away knowing that, yeah, we can learn from the past. And based upon what we learn from the past, gives you a better understanding of what may or what could possibly happen in the future. And so that's the third thing I want students to get from it. And the fourth thing is kind of make some predictions and kind of some scenarios of where this whole thing may go. So I wanted to share how it went with you and kind of my verbiage and what I said and just how I ran the class. So that way maybe you can find it helpful to talk about students about what's going on, or maybe if some other subject, kind of see how I frame things, so maybe that might be of assistance. So when the students walked in, of course we walked in, we did our normal morning routine. I always have the first 5 minutes are kind of always the same. So they did their normal routine as if they're getting prepared for notes. But once that was done, I said, all right guys, let's change things up a little bit. We got two choices. I was going to do notes today, but if you want to, I wouldn't mind taking as much time as you want to discuss what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. The choice is yours, and every class chose to have the discussion instead. Who wouldn't prefer having discussion over notes? And so we started the discussion, and I opened it up by saying this. I said, is anybody in class want to share what they know so far about what's going on? And then after that, we'll see if there's any questions. And so some students raised their hand. Always there's a few. They raised their hand, told what they thought was going on. And so here's how I handle that is a student will express what they believe is going on. Now, every time they tell me what's going on, I take what they say and I kind of rephrase it so it's a little more concise and just to clarify and weed out any kind of inaccuracies. And so a student will say something about what's going on and that'll kind of just repeat what they said if it's accurate information. If it's inaccurate information, I might say something, that's a good point. So actually what I think is going on, or I'll say that's a good thing. So what you're saying is, and I'll kind of repeat what they said, but then I'll tweak it for the correct information. That way, if any student is listening, they definitely get the correct information from it. And so that's how I handle that. So that first part is introducing students into the conversation with them sharing what they know so far. And then that kind of leaves, that gets a conversation going. Once again, I don't want it to be a lecture, I want it to be a conversation. And then I'll open up and say, well, does anybody have any questions of what's going on? And then that's when the questions start to come. And once again, I have an agenda. My agenda, once again, is kind of go through those things, those four stages as far as what's going on, what happened in the past, what can we learn from it, and then what can we make predictions. So I want to follow that format. But once again, I'm letting the students kind of lead the conversation. I'm guiding where to go, but letting them lead the conversation. And so students will raise their hand with different questions. And I field those questions as we're going through, and other students may be chiming in with their answers. Once again, if something's inaccurate, then I fix it in a way so that it doesn't put the student down, because I do appreciate their participation. And then so it normally goes something like this. They'll be talking, they're got questions, I'm answering, and normally the question would be, why is Russia doing this? And so my answer that leads me into the past. I said, well, to get a better understanding of why Russia may be doing this, it'd be helpful if we understood how this all came about. And I take him back to the Second World War. And I talk about how in the Second World War, I talk about what Hitler did. And I make sure I touch upon Hitler because I'm going to use the lessons from Hitler to talk about lessons we can learn from history. So I talk about what Hitler did and how he conquered one land, and then from there, the countries appeased him. They kind of gave in to him, and then from there, he said, "I'll stop fighting," but then later on, he continued to take over more countries. So we talk about that. Then I talk about how Hitler was defeated with the help of the Allies. I definitely mentioned that the Soviet Union and the America were some of the allies that basically stopped Hitler. And then understanding the Second World War leads right into the Cold War. And then I mentioned to them, how they got two superpowers. You got the Soviet Union, you got United States, and didn't trust each other and everything else, West, East. And then I introduced NATO, because once again, NATO comes up in this conversation. And so I kind of give them the historical background about NATO, how that came to be, because once again, that's what's going on now. That's important information for them to have to understand what's going on. And then from that point, we talk about the fear we had during the Cold War of nuclear weapons. And that kind of leads us into 1990s. I talk about how the Soviet Union fell apart. Russia comes out of that, and when it fell apart, a lot of the countries that they controlled got their independence. And I reference that back to how United States, once I'm teaching U.S. history, how the United States gained its independence from Great Britain, similar to how Ukraine gained their independence from the Soviet Union. And then that brings us to modern day. And of course, from there, at that point in time, there more questions go up, raising their hands, about what happened in the past and everything. And then it usually will lead to the point where students, so where does it go from here? And I know, once again, fielding questions, but then wait for that one question. That one question would be a good segue, a transition into the next part of what I want to talk to them about is where it can go from here. Actually, the next part is historical lessons. So where does it go from here? And then that's when I tie in stuff from the past. I'll say, I mentioned how Hitler appeasement, how that could be applied to what's going now with the Soviet Union, now Russia, how they might be taking over one country, then more after that. Don't know, but that's a possibility. Then I talk about how during the Cold War, how we were very fearful of the nuclear weapons. And I said, that's another thing that's going on, is the nuclear weapons. That's why these nations aren't getting more involved, because they're fearful of these nuclear weapons. And so we talk about that. And then ultimately we end, well, where's this going? And based upon the lessons of the past, we got two choices here. It looks like either one is that they may did like Hitler did and take over more countries, and then that might lead into a third world war, or they may just stop at that one and that's it, and with the constant fear that the United States will not enter because of the nuclear arms. And so that's how we discussed it. Now, the key to this conversation was that it is a conversation. Once again, I had objectives going into it, and I made sure we touch upon those objectives, but I let the students guide us to those places. And then I found the great moment, or the transition, the question that would be a good transition to touch upon the other thing. And I'm glad to say all 5 periods found it valuable. Participation was outstanding. And I really believe students walked away with a better understanding of what's going on. And as well, probably more importantly, they formulated their mind, because I asked, what would you do? What if you were in charge, what would you do? Would you go to help out the Ukrainians, or would you decide not to? And so the students had a better understanding, but probably more important than that is they had their minds, they started forming their opinions of what they would do, taking it to the higher level thinking about the possibilities, the outcomes, and how we should best handle it. So that is how I dealt with the Ukraine-Russia crisis. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you found it entertaining or informative, please click on one of the links that you may see above me, and you have a wonderful day.